Anyways, continuing now with our story of philosophy. Let's do a quick recap of just some of the big names, getting us back to where we were. So first off, obviously we have Thales. He's the one who started this all off. What was Thales doing?
The one stuff.
The one stuff. He's asking, what is the one stuff that connects everything? And so he starts to search for the one stuff. He's the one who kicks off philosophy. And so people are trying to come up with this one stuff philosophy. And then we have Heraclitus and Parmenides, both trying to come up with this one stuff philosophy. What was Heraclitus' answer to the one stuff?
Everything is becoming.
Nothing is, everything is becoming. Change is what the one stuff is, and everything is change. Now, both Heraclitus and Parmenides agree on one fact. Change implies a contradiction. Heraclitus says there's change in our universe. Therefore, logic doesn't work. There's contradictions, logic's out. Parmenides, he says the one stuff is being. He thought this universe was just this big, solid plenum of being. Nothing happens, nothing changes, nothing moves. It always has been and always will be this static universe. That's what he thought he had to do to preserve logic. So logic must work, so change is out. And so from here on out, our philosophers are trying to reconcile these two. They're trying to reconcile these two. They want a universe where we can have change, but they also want their logic too. So how do we get both these things? And so what Empedocles, he's the first one to make this attack, what he decided to abandon was this idea that there's just one stuff. And so he says, no, there's four stuffs: fire, water, earth, and air. And the universe now is completely full of just these four elements. Now he agreed with Parmenides that there's no such thing as non-being, there's no such thing as empty space. This universe is completely full of these four elements. But what we can have, now that we have multiple types of stuffs, what the one change we can preserve is motion. I can have some air over here and some water over here, and I can get them to swap places. And you can get motion even if your universe is completely full. Parmenides thought that the only way you can have motion is if there's empty space to move into. That would mean non-being exists, which Parmenides didn't like. Empedocles says, no, no, no. If there's multiple stuffs, we can still get motion. You just get those multiple stuffs swapping positions. And the example he gave was water and air in a tube. You got water and air in a tube, it's completely full of water and air. If I tip it like this, the air moves up, the water moves down. If I tip it like this, the air and the water, they swap places. So he thought that he argued, as long as there's multiple stuffs, then you can have motion in a completely full universe. So he argued for the multiple stuffs, fire, water, earth, and air. And furthermore, he gave them their four fundamental properties. The four fundamental properties were hot, dry, cold, and wet. Fire, for example, was hot and dry. Water was cold and wet. So each element had two fundamental properties. And so he's also able to start explaining some of our experiences, some of the qualitative experiences that we have of objects. If something feels hot, it must have more fire in it. If something feels wet, it must have more water in it. And everything is really just combinations of water, fire, earth, and air moving around. So since motion is one change that we have, he explains all change in terms of motion, and now we can satisfy both Parmenides and Heraclitus. And that's where we left off. Any questions with recap stuff before we jump into our next guy?
Just out of curiosity, with this swapping elements thing, did he imagine like this static 3D grid where one thing would just instantly be?
It's so hard to know what exactly he thought and how exactly he thought it. Partly because of what we have preserved from him, partly because, remember, Empedocles was still using very poetic language. So, how exactly he thought this swapping happened, no idea. Alright, so we get to our next philosopher now, Anaxagoras of Clazomenae, or whatever it is. His date's 500 to 428 BC. Notice that he lived through the Grecian-Persian Wars. Grecian-Persian Wars start 480 BC, so he's 20. Well, the second phase of them do. So he's 20 when the second phase of the Grecian-Persian Wars kick off, when you have your Battle of Thermopylae and your Battle of Salamis. Anyways, Clazomenae, it's a city over here. Notice that at the time of his birth, it would have been controlled by Persia. Now, that's where he's from. Little bit of his story. So he's born into a wealthy aristocratic family, but seemed to have shunned his inheritance in any pursuit of wealth. When asked why it's better to have been born than not born, he replied that being born is superior, since it enables us to study the heavens and the whole universe. So he had a life dedicated to studying the universe. That's what he thought was the best way to spend your life. That's how he spent his life. Now, he came to Athens in 480 BC. Most people speculate as part of the Persian military. So this would have been when he's 20 years old. Remember, he was over there in Ionia, controlled by Persia. Persia would have recruited Ionian soldiers to go fight for him. So he was likely in the Persian military. And he decided to stay in Athens. You might think that's a little weird, a Persian soldier staying in Athens. Well, remember, ultimately, Athens is trying to free these Ionian colonies. So he would have been viewed as a long-lost relative.
Didn't they raise Athens to the ground?
They razed Athens to the ground.
And then he stayed in Athens.
Well, he sticks around and ends up staying in Athens. So he's going to be our first philosopher that they're actually active in Athens, and that's where they're doing most of their philosophical work. So he's the first one to do that.
They rebuilt their city very quickly.
They rebuilt their city very quickly. Athens, remember, after the Grecian-Persian Wars, money is just pouring into Athens. Not only did they get Xerxes' treasury from all the cities he was looting along the way, but as they're setting up the Delian League, they have money from every Ionian city-state that they're freeing flowing back into them. And these are major trade cities, so it's a lot of wealth that they suddenly now have access to. So Athens gets rebuilt, and it gets rebuilt with a vengeance, so to speak. Anyways, so Anaxagoras seems to have taken very little pride in where he was from, and he viewed himself as a citizen of the universe, not necessarily of his little city. Someone once came along, the city he was from, they were having some turmoil, going through a tough time, and they asked him, why don't you care about the home that you're from? And his response was, I honor her indeed, and am deeply concerned with her, meaning the universe. He's dedicated his life to studying this home of his. What do you mean I'm not concerned? But when it comes to that little city, not as concerned. Now, a little bit about Greek politics, Athenian politics. Remember, they got a democracy at this point. The democracy in Athens is fairly fickle. You could be the apple of the city's eye one day as a political leader, and the next year you could be shunned, kicked out of the city. Pretty famous examples was Miltiades, I think that's his name. He was the general at Marathon. Remember, Marathon was a huge victory for the Athenians. He was the general that led that victory. So after that victory, the city's celebrating him. I think it's within 1 year he's exiled from the city. So
They had too much power.
whatever the politics are. The point is, the Athenian democracy is a bit fickle that way. It can love you 1 year and hate you the next. And so Pericles, he becomes a major politician in Athens during its rise, probably the most famous politician there is. Now he has a pretty good running, but he eventually has his falling out with the city too. Anaxagoras was a close friend of Pericles. And so as Pericles falls out of political favor, his friends start to get attacked politically. Anaxagoras is going to be one of those people. So Anaxagoras ends up getting politically attacked by the city and driven out of the city. The common excuse that they have for attacking people is you just accuse them of either being unpious or of corrupting the youth. Anaxagoras argues that the sun and the moon aren't gods, but they're actual physical substances, and so they come at him with impiety. And so that's ultimately how he's driven out of the city. Now he ends up over in Lampsacus, closer to where he's from, up here. And when he goes to Lampsacus, the city seems to just absolutely take a loving to this guy. So it seems like he ends his life in a city that pretty much loves him. Seems like he ends his life pretty good. Upon his death, Lampsacus, the city he was at, they erected an altar to mind and truth in his memory. And he requested that his death become a holiday for school children. And the city honored that request. And so in the city, his death was celebrated. In celebration of his life, not of his death. Now, he was a student of Anaximenes, of his teachings, not the person, since their lives don't overlap. So we're going to see a bit of Anaximenes come through in him. Remember Anaximenes?
Yeah.
He thought the one stuff was?
Was he the Epirion?
No.
He was air.
Air. The one stuff is air. And the way you get changed from one type of thing to another type of thing is through condensation and rarefication. But in his cosmology, he starts out with the whole universe is just air, and then you get it spinning, and through the spinning you get rarefication, condensation, and everything comes into being. So his cosmology is going to be similar. He only wrote one book, from which we have a little over 20 fragments, so not much. Fortunately, though, he's getting close enough to people like Aristotle now, who took lots of notes on people, that we're still able to do a good job reconstructing his philosophy. Now, what he's most notable for in the story of philosophy is introducing the distinction between mind and matter. So that's where we're going to spend a lot of our focus, because up until now, the lines have kind of been blurred. What's the difference between mind and matter? He's going to be the first one to start making this very clear. So that's what we'll see. Now, let's start at the beginning of his philosophy. First thing he's going to do is he's going to have a criticism of Empedocles. Empedocles thought he had solved this problem. Empedocles claims, with the movement of my four elements, I no longer have being going into not being, or not being coming from being. I don't have what is becoming what is not, and what is not becoming what is. Nothing new really comes into existence. It's just the changing proportions of these four elements that make it seem like new things are coming into existence. Anaxagoras is going to say, no, no, no. Sorry, you still messed up. Consider anything like apples, bananas, hair, flesh, etc. Things that aren't your four elements. Now, according to Empedocles, these things are just different combinations of earth, water, fire, and air. Different combinations of the four elements. Even so, all these things are very different from earth, air, water, and fire. They have very different qualities. They have very different tastes, colors, odors, textures, etc. So focusing on that banana with its banana taste. You can taste the banana, that banana taste exists. Where did it come from? Before the banana grows, there's no banana taste. According to Empedocles' view, you pump enough right combination of earth, water, fire, and air, and suddenly you got something with banana taste. Where did the banana taste come from? So it wasn't there, and now it is there. So he's going to argue, you still have what is not coming from what is, and what is going into what is not. We got to be able to explain all these different qualities. The only thing you explained was hot, dry, cold, and wet. Okay, we got those four. What about all these other qualities that we experience? So if we're going to be completely consistent and not have any new things coming into existence, we're going to need far more than just these four elements. We need a lot more elements. So how many elements do we need? Infinitely many. What is his basic position going to be? Everything exists always. From the beginning of time to the end of time, everything always existed. Now, this isn't going to be like Parmenides where there's no change. We're still going to be in a universe full of change. He loves what Empedocles did by preserving change through motion. If you have different types of things, those things swapping positions enables you to have motion. So he's going to be following Empedocles a lot here and thinking that the universe is completely full of stuff, and these different things can swap positions and move around, and he's going to explain all change through motion. So, give you one of his fragments. All things were together, infinite both in number and in smallness. For the small too was infinite. And when all things were together, none of them could be distinguished for their smallness. For air and ether prevailed over all things, being both of them infinite. For amongst all things, these things are greatest both in quantity and size. So, what is he going to say here? He's going to say, in the beginning, we had perfectly distributed everything. You had a perfect distribution of wood all throughout the universe, a perfect distribution of air, a perfect distribution of tables, bricks, markers, everything. Everything that's ever going to exist. Break it up into a really fine dust, think about it that way for now, and perfectly distribute it throughout the entire universe. Now, since there's way more air than anything else in the universe, remember they don't have a view of an atmosphere around the Earth, all the space is filled with air. Then there's a predominance of air. And so there's way more air stuff than anything else. So when you perfectly distribute it, since in any space there's a predominance of air stuff as opposed to everything else, it's all going to seem like air in the beginning. So if you were there at the beginning of the universe, all you would see, experience, witness is just air. But everything was really there. It's all just sprinkled about. There's just more air stuff than everything else. Now, since Parmenides doesn't allow for things to come into being or go away, Anaxagoras starts by saying that in the beginning there was everything. This means that in some sense bananas, fish, swords, and flesh existed in the very beginning, perfectly distributed throughout the universe. But that air and ether are predominant. This means that it seems like only air and ether exist in the beginning. And so in the beginning, the only qualities you experience are the qualities of air. Now, why is he picking air here? Because air seems like the thing that has the least amount of qualities. What color is air? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? What's its texture? So he's picking the thing with the least amount of qualities to be the predominating thing.
What's the ether again?
You can pretty much, the ether is going to be all space, but you can pretty much use that interchangeably with air everywhere, and you'll have the right idea. Okay. Now, a huge part of understanding his philosophy is dependent upon understanding his notion of infinite divisibility and comparing infinities. So, walk through that a little bit. Nor is there a least of what is small, but there is always a smaller. Give me as small as object as you want, I can always rip it in two. Take that even smaller thing, I can rip it in two. I can always divide without end. Nor is there a least of what is small, but there is always a smaller. For it cannot be that what is should cease to be by being cut. How amazing would it be if I had something small, cut it in half, and ended up with two nothings? No, I have to end up with two smaller things. So everything is infinitely divisible. But there is always a smaller, for it cannot be that what is should cease to be by being cut. But there is also always something greater than what is great. You can always make something bigger. And it is equal to the small in amount, meaning that they're both infinite. Since it's infinitely divisible, it must be composed of infinite parts. So big things are composed of infinite parts, small things are composed of infinite parts. So they're equal to the small in amount. And compared with itself, each thing is both great and small. So the idea that things are infinitely divisible is crucial for his philosophy. Since a thing is infinitely divisible, no matter how small it is, you can still divide it up into an infinite number of pieces, it has an infinite number of parts. Since it has an infinite number of parts, it can conceivably be composed of an infinite number of things. And so he's going to argue that in any space you choose in our universe, there is everything, a little bit of everything. An infinite number of everything, but remember, a teeny bit is always infinite. Doesn't matter how small the thing you choose, it's always infinite. So in this space right here, there's an infinite number of everything. It's just that the ratio of air stuff to every other type of stuff is greater. There's more air stuff than any other type of stuff in the ratio. And so it seems like air right here. However, inside, if I take this space and I start pumping out some of the air stuff and pumping in some of the chalk stuff, it's still infinite of both, but I get to the point where there's 10 chalk things for every one air thing, suddenly the space is going to seem like chalk, and it's going to exhibit all the qualities of chalk. And so we're going to call it chalk. That's what he's going to be going for here. So, in this way, it is possible for anything in the universe to be composed of infinitely many things and still be finite in size. This says infinitely number of things, however small, infinitely small, contains everything in the universe. It's just a predominance of chalk. And that's why we experience the qualities of chalk. Now, he calls them seeds. So Empedocles, he called them the roots of all things. When we get to the atomists, they're going to call them atoms. He's going to call them seeds. So, when all things were together, not even was there any color distinguishable. So he's talking about back in the beginning, when everything's perfectly distributed, so it all seems like air. When all things were together, not even was any color distinguishable, for the mixture of all things prevented it. Of the moist and the dry, and the warm and the cold, and the light and the dark, and of much earth was in it, and a multitude of innumerable seeds in no way like each other. So we have everything, an infinite number of all possible seeds right there mixed up all in the beginning. Seems like air though. For none of the other things either is like any other. And these things, being so, we must hold that all things are in the whole. So, for every single quality it's possible for you to experience, and every combination of qualities it's possible for you to experience in some object, there must be a seed that exhibits those qualities. Remember, Empedocles, he just said that your four qualities are hot, dry, cold, and wet. And you take your fire stuff, that only has hot and dry. With that, where's your banana stuff ever going to come from? It's got to come from the banana seeds. Where's your chalk stuff going to come from? It's got to come from the chalk seeds. And for all the possible qualities that you can experience, there must be some seeds of the universe that exhibit those exact qualities. And if I can get enough seeds in this space to exhibit enough of those types of seeds in this space and pump out the other seeds, then it will start to exhibit those qualities. So for every quality and every combination of qualities, we need a new type of stuff, a new seed. So we have everything in all things. And since the portions of the great and the small are equal in amount, they're both infinite, for this reason too, all things will be in everything. Nor is it possible for them to be apart, but all things have a portion of everything. So, you got something of everything in everything. Everything contains seeds of all things. A banana still contains infinitely many nose seeds, rock seeds, and fish seeds. A banana contains infinitely many seeds of everything. Why does it look like a banana? Because there's a greater portion of banana seeds. For every one rock seed, there are 100 banana seeds, or whatever it is. Since the banana seeds predominate, it seems like a banana and exhibits the qualities of a banana. Everything obtains its unique characteristics from the predominance of those unique seeds. This metaphysics making sense? Alright. Now he had a couple reasons that he disagreed with Empedocles. So completely disagrees with Empedocles' 4 elements, and claims that Empedocles still has being coming from not being. How can hair come from what is not hair, or flesh from what is not flesh? So one way he talks about this is the qualities. The other way he gets at this is, Empedocles is telling me that if you got some flesh right here, it's really just the right combination of water, fire, earth, and air. He says, and yeah, if I take that flesh and rip it in half, I have 2 pieces of flesh. And if I take each of those and rip it in half, I have 4 pieces of flesh. It would be very strange if I got a small enough piece of flesh that I rip it in half, and I got water and air over here, and earth and fire over here. It seems like no matter what, we still got flesh all the way down. And so flesh has to be one of these fundamental elements of the universe. How do you get down to this fire, water, earth, and air? I keep splitting, I can't get to it. So Empedocles says, flesh is a certain combination of the 4 elements. Anaxagoras says, if I have a piece of flesh and rip it in 2, I have 2 pieces of flesh. And if I rip each of those in half, I now have 4 pieces of flesh, etc. We never get back to our basic elements by ripping things up. Flesh is infinitely divisible, and tearing it in half will always produce 2 smaller pieces of flesh with all the qualities of flesh. Since I can't reduce it to any smaller components, flesh must be one of the elements or seeds of the universe. And this is going to hold for every other type of stuff. Same type of argument. Okay, so now change. How does change work? We've already talked a little bit about this. Since seeds of everything are in all things, we can now describe change without new things coming into being. Change is now just a separation off of some seeds, thereby changing the portions of the seeds in the object. It's important to note that after the change, there is still an infinite number of each kind of seed in the object. We're just changing the ratios of some seeds to other seeds. It's always infinite.
Do you have an understanding that infinite is root?
No, this is very bad logic. To give you a quick example, we talked about the cardinalities of the integers and the cardinality of the naturals. What are the natural numbers? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, counting up all the positive whole integers. What are all the integers? It's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but then including all the negatives. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. So you would think the integers are twice as big as the natural numbers. No, they're the exact same size, same cardinality. So his comparing 2 infinities and saying this infinity is 4 times bigger than that one and 8 times bigger than that, it just doesn't work.
You can't ratio infinities.
You can't, kind of. Because the size of the reals now is much greater than the size of the naturals. So getting into comparing infinities, this is a concept coming around in the 1800s. This is 2,000 years after this guy. So that type of mathematics is a while out. So he's using some bad math in his thinking here, but hopefully you get the thinking. So always have an infinite number. So let's think about a very specific process of change. A log burning. You got the log burning and eventually turns to ash. So a log burning might be viewed as wood seeds separating off from the log until there's no longer a predominance of wood, but rather a predominance of ash. There's still an infinite amount of wood seeds in the resulting ash. It's just before there was 10 wood seeds to every 1 ash seed. Now there's 10 ash seeds to every 1 wood seed.
So, how does burning a log of wood result in ash every time? Like, couldn't you burn a log of wood and instead of ash becoming...
Maybe as part of the natural process of a tree growing, as whatever it's physically doing to pump in the wood seeds and pump out the other seeds, it's also pumping in a lot of ash seeds. It's pumping in 10 wood seeds to every 1 ash seed, but it's pumping in 1,000 wood seeds and 100 ash seeds for every other type of seed that's getting in there. So there's a predominance of wood, but the second most predominating thing is ash. And as we reduce the wood, the ash comes into being. And it's a gradual process, so the wood doesn't instantly turn to ash. You got to keep pumping those seeds out, and you watch it slowly deteriorate, becoming less and less wood-like and becoming more and more ash-like.
Did he describe this also as far as motion, as being, it was like, there was no change, but that these were just all of a sudden becoming more prominent in this area of space?
Yeah, as you pump the seeds out, they go into different areas. So it's the swapping of seeds, the same way that Empedocles had the swapping of elements.
So why doesn't a tree grow when I burn a log?
Sorry, what?
If I burn a log and the wood seeds separate, shouldn't there be a log somewhere else?
Oh yeah, so those wood seeds are going off into the atmosphere and they're going to trees somewhere else, and those trees are now growing. And you gave them access to more wood seeds so that they can do their growing.
Is there a way did you ever think about like trapping the smoke or whatever and growing it?
And they're not going to think about experimentation to test these ideas.
Yeah.
This notion of coming up with experiments to test your hypothesis, that's going to be an Enlightenment idea.
Yeah.
So that's more than 1,000 years down the road. So just trying to logic through what's some theory that if you think about it could explain how all these things go.
Yeah.
And then they go with that theory. All right. quote from Aristotle. Anaxagoras says that the flesh from the food is added to our flesh. So that's how eating apples or eating meat can make you bigger. You're absorbing the flesh seeds out of your food. And the flesh seeds are being added to you, and that is how you accumulate more flesh through eating.
Does he think that there are different flesh seeds for different animals?
I would guess yes. He's got different seeds. If there is any qualitative difference, then there's a seed for that.
So
There's an infinite number of seeds. There's an infinite number of type of seeds, and of each type of seed, there's an infinite number. Now, it could be that if I took all the wood, or took all the particular type of seeds in the universe and added them up into one space, maybe I could fit them all into this little ball right here. But that doesn't matter because that little ball is infinitely divisible.
Yeah.
So you could just infinitely divide it up and spread it out as needed, or however much space we occupy. Okay, talked about all that. So that's how he has changed. His cosmology. Now, in the beginning, everything was combined into one, with air and ether predominating. So it all seemed like air in the beginning. Remember, he's going to follow Anaximander a bit here. Due to some sort of whirling motion, seeds began separating off, and so different types of objects start coming into being, and that's how the Earth is created. So you initially have it all just sitting there static, and then we'll talk about how we get this initial whirling, but we get the whole thing whirling, and that's how you get things separating off. The air and the fire mostly separate off upward, so you got all of outer space is full of mostly air, and it's got all the fire out there lighting up the stars and everything. And he thought the sun was also composed of fire. Leave behind more of the earthy, wet seeds down here to construct the earth and stuff like that. So here his cosmology somewhat follows that of Anaxagoras. The dense and the moist and the cold and the dark came together where the earth is now, while the rare and the warm and the dry and the bright went out towards the further part of the ether. Similar to Anaxagoras. From these, as they are separated off, earth is solidified. For from mist, water is separated off. So notice that you're going to follow Anaxagoras here. From the mist, you get the water separated off. From the water, you get the earth. From the earth, stones are solidified by the cold. And then these rush outwards more than water. So following his process of rarefication and condensation somewhat here. So that gives you a sense of his cosmology. Some of his observations about natural phenomena. He gave a correct explanation for eclipses and how they occurred, so seem to understand eclipses. He described the sun as a fiery mass larger than the Peloponnesus. Remember, at this time, the Greeks have no clue how big the earth is. And so he at least knew it must be, I think, wish I had the number up there. It's something like 7 times bigger than the Peloponnesus or whatever, but bigger than the Peloponnesus at least, so that's a good start. He claimed that the moon was made out of the same stuff as the earth. Some people think he must have had really good eyesight because he also thought that the moon wasn't perfectly spherical, but actually had hills and valleys. And then, direct quote from him, it is the sun that puts brightness into the moon. So he knew that the moon was really just reflecting the sun's sunlight. We call rainbows a reflection of the sun in the clouds, another quote of his. So, not a bad estimation of what a rainbow is.
Didn't Empedocles say those two things too?
It's always a bit debated who was the first one to say it and what they thought. So there's always interpretations that you could say, yes, they did. And Empedocles gives you a lot more room for interpretation due to his poetical language.
Okay.
And understand that they are contemporaries. Actually, Empedocles is a little bit younger than Anaxagoras. It's just that Anaxagoras got going in philosophy after Empedocles. And so a lot of his philosophy was addressing Empedocles. So we cover him in reverse order.
Okay. Does he have an explanation for why there's the whirling motion, like the love and strife, or
Yes.
the other guy?
So that's exactly what we're going to get into next. How do we get this whirling motion? So, ultimately, it's going to be from mind. So, mind prior to Anaximander. Let's think about the state of mind in philosophy so far. Previous philosophers were Hylozoists. They thought that matter was in some sense alive, intelligent, and capable of initiating its own movement. Right? You go back to Thales. He thought that all things have souls in them, some sort of moving principle, and he had one of his most famous lines, the all is divine. Now, Anaximander is going to introduce what he calls Nous. We typically interpret that as mind, as an ordering force which is ultimately responsible for all movement in the universe. The closest thing to Anaximander's Nous is that we covered so far is going to be Heraclitus's Logos. But he's going to be the first one that actually separates these two very clearly. Mind and everything else. Now, before we go over this, let's think about the properties of mind for a second. What can mind do? It can think, it can know things. So that's one of the main properties you're going to talk about. The mind is what knows. You can't teach a rock something. Minds are the things that learn. And so we got to separate the stuff that makes up rocks and mind stuff. So minds can know, and the other things that minds are capable of is motion independent of any other cause. If I've got some dominoes set up, and I knock over one and it falls, the only reason the last domino fell is because the previous domino hit it. So everything in the universe that has motion had to have been caused by some previous motion, except the motion that some mind originates. You can choose out of the blue to just stick your hand in the air. And that's not because of some jiggling that ultimately made your hand shoot up in the air. That started with your mind deciding that you had some purpose and you wanted to put your hand up in the air, and so you did. And so minds seem capable of initiating motion without some previous cause. A rock can't just fly through the air unless something physical ultimately, some series of dominoes was ultimately falling that ultimately led to that rock flying through the air. It's only minds that can initiate motion without something causing it. So if motion comes into our universe, it must have somehow come from mind. So a mind can originate motion without it being previously caused by some physical thing, and mind is capable of knowing. And these are going to be the two properties of mind that he focuses on. So in everything, there's a portion of everything except nous. Mind is the one thing that's not mixed up with everything. And there are some things in which there is nous also. Some things have mind, some things don't. Now, nous isn't mixed in with everything else. Inanimate objects like rocks do not contain any nous at all. They have no minds. And when nous began to move things, separating off took place from all that was moved, and so much as nous set in motion was separated. And as things were set in motion and separated, the revolution caused them to be separated much more. In other words, you've got this static universe in the beginning, and you got all of nous, all of mind collected together. All of nous comes across this static universe, and it decides to give it motion. And that was one big mind before it was mixed in, and that got the motion going. And then the nous mixes in with some of it. And so some things have nous, mind, and some things don't. So all the mind that you, me, everyone else, it was once all collected into this ultimate mind, back in the beginning, that gave motion to the universe. The initial motion it gave to the universe is what causes everything that we would call natural laws. Everything that happens, like a lightning bolt going off, how did that ultimately happen? You go all the way back and start with the separating off of the sun and the earth getting created, and then the clouds getting created, and the motion of the clouds is a side effect of that whirling off, and they collide in a way and rub together, that creates lightning. And that was predetermined from when nous first started the universe spinning. So all natural phenomena, that's from the ultimate spinning that the universe started out with. And then the nous mixes with you, me, and everything else has mind, and we're able to do similar things on a smaller scale, and make our own motions that we want in the universe. So that's how the nous got involved. So nous ultimately is what kicks off the creation of the universe. Before that, completely static, nous got things moving. Here's Aristotle talking about it. All other things partake in a portion of everything, while nous is infinite and self-ruled, and is mixed with nothing, but is alone itself by itself. For it is the thinnest of all things and the purest, and it has all knowledge about everything, and the greatest strength. And nous has power over all things. It can move things, both greater and smaller, that have life. So, if you don't have life, you sure don't have nous. It's the first property of having nous is you start to show life. And nous have power over the whole revolution, so that began the revolution in the beginning. And all things that are mingled together and separated off, indistinguishable, are all known by nous. So this mind, it knew the universe in the beginning, and it's that piece of nous that's in you that enables you to come to know that universe again. Nous is an intelligent force that governs over all things, knows all things, and is responsible for all movement in the universe. All the movement you're responsible for is because you have that nous. So the movement you create is still responsible for by nous. Nous is still responsible for it. Anything in the universe capable of thought or independent action must in some way partake of nous. Those that can't, don't. So what we got here is our first teleological view. This is a common word in theology, or in philosophy, also theology. Teleological. What does that mean? Teleological, it means relating to or involving the explanation of phenomena in terms of the purpose they serve, rather than of the cause by which they arise. Let me give you an example. If I were to say, you watch some unsupported rock here, and I let go and it falls, I say, why'd that object fall? Why'd the rock fall? You'd say, gravity pulled it down, right? That's not a purpose, that's a physical thing causing it to move. On the other hand, if I watch you stand up, go get a glass of water and drink it, I say, why did you do that? You'd say, I was thirsty. There was a purpose you were trying to solve. So teleological is looking at actions in terms of the purpose they solve, rather than the physical thing that caused them. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because that's a concept that will stick around. No. When we determine why a mind did something, we give a teleological explanation. When I determine why you got a drink of water, I give a teleological explanation. When we determine why an inanimate object did something, we give a causal explanation. You jumping versus a rock falling. You jump, you might want to see how high you can reach. There was some purpose. Rock falls, gravity pulled it. Or some decay was going on the side of the mountain, and so the rock fell, or whatever. So two very different types of explanations. Notice that since mind is putting matter into motion for some rational purpose, then Anaxagoras is imposing a teleological view on the creation of the whole world. There must have been a purpose for the whole world coming into existence to begin with. Whatever Nous had in mind when it started that spinning motion. Now, however, when it comes to explaining natural phenomena, he avoids using Nous in his explanation as much as possible. He just wants to say that Nous put the spinning into motion, and then that naturally leads to everything that leads to. And it's only when he's at a complete loss to try and explain some phenomena that he brings Nous back in. So some later philosophers complain that he uses Nous kind of like a God of the gaps argument. Anytime there's something you can't explain it, it's because it's the way Nous wanted it to be. That's why. So a bit of a scapegoat for him, but it's that introduction of Nous that he's most famous for. So now going back and thinking about his the scientific portion of his philosophy. Think about the mess that we're in now. What did we want? Thales wanted to find the one in the many, the unifying amongst the diversity. He wanted to describe all things in terms of some single substance, and describe how it is that all these things are related. What does Anaxagoras say? Anaxagoras says, sorry, the only thing you can know about bananas, they're composed of banana seeds. The only thing you know about bricks, they're composed of brick seeds. You can't talk about how anything's related to anything else, or how anything turns into anything else. Nothing's related. It's all separate, it's all its own unique thing. It's a completely unworkable scientific theory. You can't relate anything to anything. It's all just its own separate seeds. And that's the only explanation we can give. Not much of an explanation at all. So you can see why he's more famous for his mind stuff than he is for his science stuff. Because the science stuff brings us to dead end. And so it was obvious that brought us to dead end, which brings us to our next school of philosophers, the atomists. Any questions about Anaxagoras before we move?
When did he die?
Oh, I can't remember his date.
420, I believe.
Sounds about right. 428.
Yeah.
When was the Peloponnesian War?
I think they started 435-ish, somewhere around there. So, yeah, he would have lived through a good chunk, if not all, the Peloponnesian Wars. I don't remember when they ended.
Like he was in Persia at that time, was he?
I don't know the exact dates that he left Lampsacus. He left when Pericles was still in power, so it would have been before Sparta sacked Athens.
Yeah.
But it also was when Pericles was falling out of favor. I think that's about the same time that the plague hits Athens. I don't know the dates on that. So probably sometime around there. Any other questions on Anaxagoras?